Hello and welcome to today's podcast. Today we're going to look at emotional intelligence and more specifically self-awareness. My name's Andrew Farquharson.
And my name's Abby Twomlow.
Emotional intelligence is sometimes looked at as a soft skill, which most people think is a bit wishy-washy then, but actually it's really the basic tool to help us succeed within ourselves and also in our sort of social life. And I'm using the word social, meaning working with other people. So, and what is it? Well, it's about recognizing and understanding our emotions and being able to work with them because life's basically all about emotion and how we respond to it. We can get mad, we can get angry, we can get upset, we can have laughter, all of those types of emotion. But how we respond to them can determine how we function in life personally and with other people. We can also then start to recognize those emotions in other people and how we can also respond and work with that. It's not about not having an emotion. It's not about stiff upper lip and trying to push emotion out of the way. Um, if you think about it, when you go to work or in any other situation, you don't hang your emotions up when you go through the door. If you've had an argument with somebody, that still stays with you when you go into your workplace or you're going into a social situation or how you view that person. You don't sort of just hang it up on a coat rack and just pick it up when you come back out. So it does affect us, but we need to know why. There are basically what are called emotional intelligence, two which really sort of affect us as an individual within ourselves, and that is self-awareness, then how to regulate or manage that self-awareness. So, and then there's social awareness, how we respond to others, and what we could call social skills or social regulation, how that works for us. And we'll, over the next few podcasts, we're going to have a look at those areas in a bit more detail. So today, we're going to look at self-awareness. So, Abby, have you any thoughts on self-awareness?
Yeah, I think self-awareness is the cornerstone, isn't it, to emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence impacts every part of our lives, and I always get people to think about it in a way that if you had to work with somebody or employ somebody within a business, if you had a business, what kind of person would you want working for you? Because quite often when we think about the kind of person we'd like working for us or to work with us, it's not about how skilled they are. It's not about the qualifications they've got on their paper or anything like that. It's about the kind of person that they are. Are they a good listener? Are they empathetic? Do they work hard? Have they got the right attitude? And all of those things stem from emotional intelligence. And like you say, quite often it's considered to be a soft skill, which suggests it's sort of a soft option. But actually, I think it's a superpower to doing well in life. Um, because emotional intelligence isn't just about you and your emotions. It's much bigger than that. Like Andrew says, it's about other people, how you interact with other people, how you understand other people. And that all has to start with you understanding yourself. Now, you've got the numbers on this one, Andrew, and I always forget them, but actually, there's a high number of people that believe that they've got really high self-awareness, above average self-awareness, but actually, something like less than 10% of people are actually very self-aware. People know about themselves, they know what they like, what they don't like, their hobbies, the things that they enjoy doing, but that's not what self-awareness is. Self-awareness is about having a deep understanding of your thinking and emotions and how you create them, because emotions don't just happen to you, they come from your thinking and the way that you look at situations. So, um, you have to be able to understand that process and understand your patterns of thinking to then be able to do something about them.
That's
Have I
right.
got
And as you say about the figures, um, a few years back, Harvard University did a study of a lot of their students. I think it was about 10,000 in the study. So that's a very large study of their students who thought they were self-aware. actually turned out that you're right, it was only about 10% of them that truly were self-aware. So what were the other sort of 90% thinking about? Well, we all think we know ourselves, like you said,
Mhm.
um, but that is colored by our perception, just the way we think about things. It's also covered by our confirmation bias. Um, Sometimes it's a bit wishful thinking, or it might be the fact that we just think we're rubbish or we're not very good at anything. And none of these things are maybe true.
Mhm.
It's just how we think about ourselves. There was an American philosopher um, who said that the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. So when we think about that ourselves, it's what we think we know about ourselves, and that determines how we go on. How then do we find out about self-awareness, our own self-awareness, and also what effect it has? Well,
I was I was going to say that because actually you might be kind of wondering like, what does it matter? Like, why is it important? Because whether you think you're self-aware or not, what are the benefits to having good self-awareness? And also, what are the issues around having low self-awareness? I guess that's perhaps something we can look at. And also, it is a skill set, isn't it? It's not like IQ that can't be altered. Emotional intelligence is something that you can learn and practice being better at. So you can definitely learn to be more self-aware. So I think we'll kind of look at those two things. So let's look at the benefits to it first, really. And I suppose the first thing is it can make you feel more in control of your life, and that can make you more proactive and motivated. Um, it increases your self-esteem, and it also helps you to see things from different perspectives. So can make you a more reasonable person, a bit more empathetic towards others because you can see um, different different perspectives. So that leads to, I guess, better decision making if you're looking at things a bit more objectively. What would you like to throw in the mix?
yeah, that's true. And I'll give you a sort of example of how that sort of worked or from my own experience. And this is how not being, not understanding self-awareness about my, obviously about myself, generated more emotion, such as annoyance and anger and frustration within myself, but also had an effect when I worked with other people. I used to play hockey. When we were going to play in away games, we would meet at a certain time. So that we go in a few cars to the away game, and that would be that. There were always three people late to our meet, and it wasn't just a few minutes or anything like that. It was 20, 30 minutes. They were always late. And one of the few things that used to get me sort of upset, frustrated, annoyed was people being late. And this is what happened. Um, and so when we went and played in a game, subconsciously, I would be reluctant to pass the ball to those people because I don't know, maybe because they were always this late, they weren't trustworthy or something like that. And that worked to the detriment of the team. It also meant that I was annoyed for a long period of time. And though I knew I was annoyed, I didn't realize it was. I mean, this sounds a silly thing to say, but I didn't really realize it was the fact that they were late. It was just this was the one thing that got me annoyed. Then I thought 4 or 5, 6 times this happening. Why don't I just ask why they're always late? By the way, I wasn't the only person that had these feelings either. But, but why? And it turned out that they lived outside the city in a rural setting. None of them drove. They had to rely on public transport. And the bus service was not that great. There's about 3 or 4 hours between buses. So if they got the bus that would have arrived in time, they would have actually been about 3 hours before the actual meet time. But if they got the next bus, they would have arrived. So they would always be 20 to 30 minutes late for meeting. So when I realized this, got together with the others and said, well, it's possible that and easy enough for us just to change the meeting time by half an hour, which
Mhm.
we did. They were always on time. After that, everybody was happy. I didn't get frustrated, but it was just recognizing that fact and trying to find out how you could work with it, change it. And that had a benefit, as I say, not only for me, but for the others, for the team, for the greater good. And that was just becoming aware, self-aware that it was this late thing. And as a consequence now, actually, if people are late, I don't, it doesn't affect me in the same way that it used to, because I always then ask or try and work out why somebody's habitually late. Um,
I mean, I'm very glad to hear that because I'm always late. I'm always late for these podcasts by at least 5 minutes.
that's not an issue. That's not an issue. But it's just that sort of extended time. And I just use that as an example and how it the emotion of it also would stop me from playing well in
Yeah.
that. So it was
And I guess,
detrimental to me.
yeah, and I suppose it's important to point out at this stage as well that actually it wasn't them being late, it wasn't them that was making you angry.
Mhm.
That emotion is not caused by another person. The feeling has come from yourself and the way that you were thinking about them being late, wasn't it? Because
Yeah.
yes, you said other people were annoyed about it as well, but there will have been other people that felt differently about it. They will have felt differently about it, or certain different extremes of that emotion. And it's always the way that you think about a situation that creates that emotion, isn't it? So for example, you're probably thinking, oh God, I bet they're late again, or 10 minutes in, like, where are they? Why aren't they here yet? And it's those thoughts that then build that feeling, isn't it? And I suppose when you have a feeling or an emotion, it's about sort of working backwards a little bit, I suppose, to undo the knot, isn't it? What thoughts were you having just before you felt that emotion that's brought that to the forefront, that's created that feeling? Because I think that helps you to be self-aware. If you can just sort of unpick it a little bit, particularly your thoughts around it, then you can start to kind of question it a little bit and put it to the test and take action on it. Because I think a lot of the time with our emotions, we just assume that they happen and we never do anything about it because they're just feelings and they're there and there's nothing we can do. Whereas actually, that's not true. And what you've just said is a really good example of that. Once you started to unpick it and recognize what was happening, then you could take action that was much more helpful, not just to you, but to those people around you. And that shows high emotional intelligence, doesn't it?
Mhm. And that's true. And as each time went on, like you said, you start to anticipate the fact they're going to be late, which is already building up that sense of stress, anxiety, which magnifies it to a certain extent. I suppose in one way you get when they were late, you would sort of say to yourself, "See, I knew I was right." There were, that type of thing. There's a sort of perverse pleasure in that, but it is just your own thoughts, the way that you think about them, and we've said in other podcasts that basically there's two things we think about our thoughts. We think our thoughts are true and we think that they're real.
Yeah.
And neither's the case. They're not true, they're not real, they're just thoughts. But they have a real effect. So if we're starting to get ourselves angry or annoyed or something like that, then it's going to have an effect. Yeah.
So let's look at the other end of the scale then. People who are not good at self-awareness, that they have low self-awareness. What is the impact of that? People who are not self-aware, why is that problematic? What's the downside, I guess?
Well, the downside to that is can lead to greater frustration within that person, anger, self-doubt. Um, and as we know, the way that we tend to feel about ourselves, and if we have heightened emotions if we think of a rev counter always in the red,
Yeah.
uh, that's going to have a physical effect on our bodies. Um, and we can talk about that in some detail at some other time, but it does have a physical effect on our bodies. If we feel we're powerless, and many people will feel they're powerless just because of a certain situation, their life situation that they're in, whether it's in personal relationships or in a work situation, they might feel they can't do anything about it. That then spirals down and can lead to all sorts of difficulties and so on.
Yeah, and it's that low motivation, isn't it? And I think if you're not motivated, you're not productive as well. So you don't sort of have that get up and go. That can impact all sorts of things, like you say, your work, your education, your learning processes. And it impacts other people because you're less likely to be empathetic, you're less likely to understand other people's points of view. So that can sort of cause issues within friendships or families or, all sorts of things. So it's quite a big impact, isn't it?
Interestingly, the just being aware of self-awareness, consciously aware of it, can have a big role to play. And just in general, you notice, well, actually, what is it? What triggers it? Like you said earlier, what happened just before that event or that emotion that came along? Then how does it manifest itself in me? How does it make me, like I was saying with the hockey, sort of I got annoyed, I got frustrated. I didn't then include them in the game in a sense.
Mm,
How does that come about? Um, and it was only when I started to be aware of that I could then do something.
yeah, make those changes.
Yeah. Um, but as you say, it it does cause difficulties with empathy, um, with working as a team or in your personal life, causes all sorts of difficulties. And from a business point of view, it can have a real effect financially. You know, if you're working with customers and so on, and the way you feel, if you suddenly become annoyed or angry or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
with that, then somebody's not going to buy your product. And if that happens, obviously, quite frequently, that you're going to lose money on that. You might decide to leave the job, you might get sacked, whatever it might be. And that has a financial impact on the company as well, because they've got to retrain, etc., etc.
Well,
So,
and the bigger picture than that as well, we've probably all worked somewhere where we've had an awful boss that's had no self-awareness at all, that doesn't understand the people that work from them or doesn't care about people. I
mm,
think everybody must have been in a job like that. So the impact of that on a leadership level is massive. And, again, would you want that person working for you or with you, that management person, would you want them to work with you? No, absolutely you wouldn't choose for them to work with you because they're just not a nice person to be around. But that spreads through a whole business.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, that's the kind of thing that we can relate to, is
How many managers in particular, but just people that you work with, how many of those would you employ if you had the opportunity? And most of the time, when you ask that question, very few people say they would employ lots of managers that they've worked with. Usually it's maybe one, and very often is none. And the reason for that isn't the sort of technical aspect of the job that the manager or the leader um, wasn't capable of. It's always down to the personal relationship, the man management aspects of these things, and that's to do with emotional intelligence. And it's reckoned that to be successful across the board, whether it's in personal life or in a work business environment, that you need 20% IQ and 80% emotional intelligence. Because we all know people that are really got 3,000 degrees, and they're just not very successful in life, whether personally or in business terms. Or we also know the other person that's got very little in the way of formal education or educational qualifications, etc. But they're very successful. They have a wide spread of friends and acquaintances and so on. And it's because they tend to be emotionally intelligent, and that's how it works.
Yeah, I heard a really good quote recently that said, you might not remember what somebody did, but you'll always remember how they made you feel. And that was talking about working for somebody, actually. But it's right. You might remember that you really disliked somebody or hated working for somebody, or somebody did something. You perhaps don't remember what it was, but you will always remember how it made you feel. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. But like we said earlier, emotional intelligence is something that you can improve.
Mhm.
So I suppose to round up, we should perhaps offer people some tips and skills for how to improve their self-awareness. So one thing from me is I think we're really good at trying to ignore our thoughts, and pass them off or distract ourselves. We live in such a busy world; it's really easy to distract yourself. But actually, one way of becoming much more self-aware is to listen to your thoughts a little bit more. And once a teacher, always a teacher. I always use an acronym with my clients, which is to just tell yourself to wait every now and again at random points through the day, not just when you're feeling stressed or anxious or angry. And that wait stands for, what am I thinking? What is the thought in your head right now? Is it helpful? Is it true? And what feeling is that starting to create? Because if it's not helpful, not true, and it's bringing about an emotion that's not helpful at that time, then swap it for something more helpful that makes you feel much more in control. And it is a skill. It's something that you get better at the more you do it. So you're not going to be amazing at it straight away. It's not always going to just calm you down instantly. But actually, what am I thinking? Is it helpful? And can I swap it for something that is more helpful that makes me feel better?
Yeah, that's excellent. I'd say it's excellent because it's what I was going to say. But anyway, that, that's great. No, the other thing is, again, we touched on it slightly earlier, is when you've done this weight exercise, is to also just ask yourself, what happened just before I had that thought, that emotional thought, that that experience? What was I thinking? And to be aware of that. You can write it down, or you can just start to become more aware of it. So it's a sort of self-reflection in that. And then it's just taking a few moments, just as you say, just sit down and just have a wee think. And it's also very good. You can relax doing that. One sort of physical thing to help a bit is actually do some breathing. Just take a deep breath in, hold it for a moment or two, and just slowly breathe out. What that can do is just lower any sort of anxieties that come with those thoughts. It's actually nature's way of lowering anxiety, helping us to take control. But oddly enough, even though we breathe all the time, we should practice that because it does help. And there's lots of other things. And in our next podcast, we'll be talking more about how you manage that,
Mhm.
how you regulate it. And so there'll be many more tips. But it's just being aware, and don't beat yourself up if you think, oh, that's terrible, that's awful. I mean, imagine thinking that. That's so, no, that's fine. Just recognize it, but don't give yourself a hard time at all, because you remember you're a human being, you're not a machine. And that'll be a little phrase that's used quite a lot through all of these things. So we look forward to seeing you next time. And I'll say cheerio. Bye.
Yep, thanks for joining us. See you next time. And as always, if you haven't given us a follow, please do. If you've got any questions or comments, we're always really happy to hear from you. So drop us a message. We love hearing your thoughts, and we will see you again really soon. Take care for now. Bye.
Bye bye.